Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Drive Pink Dialogue for a special early morning edition of the podcast. It's episode number 74. I'm your host, Scotty. I'm here with my co-host, Saur, and it is early in the day. So I want to start by asking, how are you feeling, my man?
I don't know if we've done this early an episode since at least we
Never.
started
Definitely
doing the
never.
podcast. So for you especially, it's very early on the state side. So I'm still doing okay, but it is what it is, man. We wanted to get this bright and early and make sure we do it when we're fresh. So I always like the midweek episodes because it gives us a chance to be a little bit more adventurous in our thoughts and ideas. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and seeing what you have in store for us today.
Yeah, well, let's just kind of go over everything we're going to do in this episode. There is some Neymar news that I think we can have a conversation about, because I don't think the two of us have actually had a conversation about Neymar specifically in this forum, in this setting. So I think that will be kind of interesting. And then in the second half of this episode, we'll talk more about the playoffs, things that Inter Miami have to look to avoid, things that could get in their way, and we'll recap what's happened in the first round around the league and stuff like that. But let's get right into it with this Neymar conversation, because Michelle Kaufman and others have reported for the last couple of days that Neymar has bought a mega mansion in South Florida, using all that money he made in Saudi Arabia to, build his life stateside. And of course, he's chosen Miami to do that. I don't know. Maybe he's going to retire. Maybe he's just going to go live his life. I don't know. But I think it is interesting that Inter Miami has this exciting project with his friends from Barcelona. And there has always been, I think, a desire for at least the last several years to have these players reunite in a way that could be meaningful on the field. And this feels like the place to make that happen. So ironic or interesting that Neymar now owns property in South Florida as he's coming to the end of his Saudi Arabia Al Hilal contract.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there are a couple of things, right? My first reaction to this, always being the pragmatist that I am, was, oh, maybe he's finally figuring out what his retirement plans are, given that Messi is going to be here for a couple of years, and we expect Messi to fully retire in Miami. And it looks like Messi's family is well settled there. Busquets is in Miami as well. Jordi Alba as well. Suarez now settled in Miami, and it seems like they're all planning their retirement life there. So perhaps this is an investment that Neymar's making as part of his retirement plans to have a home in Miami and be able to spend some time with his friends after he finishes his football career. That was my first reaction. And then there was a part of me which was like, you know what? I don't think Neymar's done playing football. There's definitely a very high probability that he is looking to continue playing after his Al Hilal contract ends. And he hasn't had the opportunity to play that many games. I'm not even sure how many games he's played over the last year due to his injury. So he's probably looking to get back on the pitch. And what better team to do that for than Inter Miami? Because all your best friends play there. Inter Miami is doing really, really well. The MLS is, I don't want to call it the retirement league. It's not that by any means. It's a much more difficult league than people give it credit for. But it's a different pace, and it'll allow him to be a little bit more experimental and expressive with his style. And he can just go out, have fun, and see the rest of his career out at Inter Miami. And that could be a potential consideration into why he's buying that property. I am excited by it. I would really consider the chance of him joining into Miami as a positive for the club. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, and maybe as we explore this, my mindset changes. But as of now, my initial reaction was very positive in terms of even the remote 2% possibility of Neymar joining into Miami.
I will add that over the last couple of days, there's been some reports that Neymar, who's now healthy and is back playing and slowly coming back from that knee injury, is probably not going to join the Brazilian national team for these November international window because he wants to focus on getting healthy. And so that implies to me that there is a plan to bring him back to the Brazilian national team probably next March during that international window and potentially moving forward. So that signals to me he plans on continuing playing beyond this season. I think it's very possible that he has a new contract with Al Hilal or the Saudi league. But I think it's also very likely that he said, I went there, I spent my 2 years, I got the 150 million or whatever amount of money he was going to make there. And then he comes back to, something he wants to do, live a lifestyle he wants to live, and then play soccer with his friends, right? And so for me, it feels entirely realistic that Lionel Messi, Luis Suarez, and Neymar might be the front three for Inter Miami this time next season. That's, I think, the easiest way to put it.
Don't feed the fire, man, because the more you say, the more excited I get. That Barcelona trio during their heydays was potentially the best Barcelona has looked in terms of their front line, and it was absolutely deadly. Of course, we're going to get a version of that, but if we can see Neymar on that wing for Inter Miami with Suarez up top and Messi on the right, that's going to be phenomenal. I will say, and I think we need to contextualize this with the viewers and the listeners, he is only 32 years old. So he may not be in the prime of his career anymore, but he's still got plenty of football to play. And again, listen, this is a player that was started to be the next successor to Messi and Ronaldo in terms of his impact on world football. He was potentially that player who missed out on a Ballon d'Or just because he had two greats of the world football, in front of him. He has been phenomenal whenever he's taking the pitch. Very exciting player to watch, very impactful. And yes, his career has sort of been a little bit on the downward trend since he moved to Saudi Arabia, but that has to do with injuries and that has to do with lack of playing time. So that might be a consideration that we need to keep in mind, whether he's actually able to compete over the course of a season fully fit and what that looks like. And maybe, just maybe, we need to have somebody to back him up for when he's unavailable to play and not allow him to play all the 38 games that we have in the regular season. So a lot of considerations to keep in mind, but overall, just having that trio of Messi, Suarez, and Neymar up top is maybe that's what gets us the trouble, right?
Yeah, listen, Inter Miami will be in the Club World Cup next year. They're going to be at the CONCACAF Champions Cup again, though that would probably end before any Neymar arrival. But of course, you have the following year, and then of course Leagues Cup and MLS Cup, and who knows what's going to happen with the U.S. Open Cup. And so there's a lot of trophies to be won here. And I think if you're Neymar and you think this Inter Miami team's already set up, right, because the infrastructure in place has already been established by everything that Tata Martino and Lionel Messi have put together here, and Chris Henderson and the Moss brothers and everything. So you can kind of step into a winning situation, come in, fit on that left side, which, has not been occupied by a global superstar like Neymar. And so he would fit there nicely. I think this could make a lot of sense. Now, let's talk about how this would work logistically, because you're talking about adding a DP level player. I know Jordi Alba and Luis Suarez have taken contracts that have allowed them to be, TAM level players, not requiring that DP level money. I think Neymar would require that. I think he would probably be on a similar salary to Messi. But Inter Miami could potentially open a third DP spot or use a third DP spot next year if they wanted to go this route. And then also they could, there's a possibility that MLS will add a fourth DP or a third DP, or make it easier to use a DP spot on a player like this. That kind of conversation has been going on for years, and it feels like every year the MLS does take a step in that direction. So the roster rules, the flexibility that has been provided by the MLS, this is entirely possible, and it wouldn't require some huge sacrifice or roster switch up or change up from Inter Miami to make this happen. Now, could they do this and also get Di Maria? No. Could they do this and also get another DP level player? No. But if you're talking about identifying this guy as the one guy you want, and you feel confident, and if you're the Moss brothers and you go there and you meet with him and you say, we want to make this happen, and he says, so do I, it's absolutely there to be made. And I think that's really cool, because that's exactly what happened with Messi, and they made it happen.
Yeah, and listen, logistically speaking, I know we can make this happen in terms of the DP player slots and all the other contract situations, but I think there is a case to be made that we will be losing one player at least on that left wing side to accommodate Neymar, whether that's Robert Taylor. I don't expect Facu Farias to leave. So I do think it's going to be Robert Taylor who might have to be on the chopping block in terms of his, you know, him being part of this Inter Miami team. So a lot to look out for in that sense. But I like the point that Hash makes here that I think we should improve the team as a whole. Then we can go for Neymar if they want. I don't know what you think about this, but do you really think we need Neymar, or are there other areas on the pitch that you would like to see us prioritize in terms of getting that, not DP, but a DP level player, perhaps, maybe in defense, maybe in central midfield? We've had Yannick Bright play practically every single minute this season, and when he's not available, we just look like a poor team, right? Would it be worth having another defensive midfielder in there rather than reinforcing our front three? Not sure. That's something to look out for. And I'm almost inclined to say that I agree with Hash here that we should potentially look at improving the team before we go for a position that may not be as important.
Can I ask you a reflective question on that? If you had asked me this question a year ago, I would have said, no, we don't need Luis Suarez. We have Leo Campana, who is a starting caliber MLS striker. Go get a DP center back. Go get a superstar in the midfield. But we got Suarez, and it turned out really, really well. So I think it would be the same thing with Neymar. It's like, yes, if you and I are picking our priorities, go get a center back, go get a right back, defensive midfielder, etc. But if you have the chance to add a player like Neymar, especially if you have the chance to do it without disrupting so much of your roster build and your squad depth and how your roster is constructed, I think you just go do it because he's that level of player. I will say he's only played a couple games for Al Hilal, 3 league games for them, and I think 1 came when he first got injured. So he's just coming back. We don't know what type of player he is now, but before the injury, he was still Brazil's best player. And you're talking about an ACL injury that players come back from all the time. It's not really a career ender anymore, like it may have been 30 years ago. So you have to feel like this is still an equivalent talent to what he was. And coming into the MLS, just like Busquets, just like Jordi Alba, just like Luis Suarez, just like, well, maybe not like Lionel Messi, but like the other guys, he would come in and instantly be the best player in the league at his position.
Yeah, and there's absolutely no doubt about the talent. I completely agree with you on that. It just doesn't disappear like that. The only thing I would be concerned about, or not concerned about, but look out for a little bit, is his motivation, right? Is he motivated to still achieve things in world football, or is he now at the swan song of his career where he just wants to enjoy and play football? That's something that he'd probably keep in mind whenever making the next step. And regardless of what his attitude towards that is, I do think Inter Miami is a good destination for him because he's going to be able to play football with his best friends. And I think he's going to enjoy playing football. He's seen what Inter Miami has done this season, and he's seen how happy Lionel Messi looks, how happy some of the other Barcelona boys look as well, and they're achieving something together. And if he can be part of that, I think that's motivation enough for any player, right?
Well, and also, listen, if he was still determined to win the Ballon d'Or, if he was still determined to win the Champions League, he wouldn't have gone to Saudi Arabia, right? So you have to imagine that he's in the sort of, I want to enjoy myself and do things off the field, like endorsements, sponsorships, make money, and build the rest of my life, more so than he is determined to get a certain piece of silverware. And again, he's had a ton of success in his career, both at Barcelona and to a lesser extent at PSG. But so in terms of career accolades, he's quite high up the list. And it is kind of exciting that we can talk about adding a player like Neymar and have a realistic conversation about this. And credit to the Moss brothers and Inter Miami for making that possible, because there's no other club in the league that could realistically say, let's go get Neymar and feel like they have a chance to actually do it.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just going to absolutely boost our front line in a way that potentially has never been done in the MLS. So superstar caliber players. And we all doubted Luis Suarez when he first started, and look at him being
Whoa. Hold off on the we all doubted Luis Suarez.
Okay. Taylor Twellman doubted Luis Suarez and his ability to contribute.
Let's talk about another thing which just crossed my mind. But if you are Neymar and you're Al Hilal and you feel like this plan that you had for Neymar and for all these superstars didn't quite come to fruition like you expected a year and a half ago when you bought them all. And because of that, you didn't buy a bunch more this past summer. And so you're kind of pivoting away from this, let's just buy all these big name players. Maybe there's a world where Al Hilal would be willing to let him go in January instead of holding him to the end of the contract, because they might, decide we don't want to pay this player X amount if we're not getting the return that we wanted. And if he has a reasonable landing spot, I don't know how realistic that is, but if you are Inter Miami and you pay them $5 million for Neymar and Neymar doesn't want to be there anymore, he never really enjoyed it, he's not giving you the off the field benefits you thought you were getting, I could see a world, not likely, but a world where he could leave Saudi Arabia and join a different club now, or not now, but in January. I don't think it's particularly likely because I think there's probably some pride with Saudi Arabia and Inter Miami dating back to the Messi saga that maybe wouldn't allow that. But just something to keep in mind. You could see how a player would be unhappy. And Saudi Arabia has done, I think, the Saudi teams that have bought these players, I think, have done a good job of letting them go if they feel like it's not working out in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Jordan Henderson being the case in point, right? Moved to Ajax almost 6 months after he had his first switch. They would potentially want to recuperate some money out of him. Listen, Neymar can negotiate a contract in January if it works the same way in the Saudi league as it does everywhere else in the world. He will be able to negotiate a contract with another team in January or discuss terms, right? And I agree with you. There might be a world where the Saudi league does want to recuperate some money off of him, and they may be able to get something back in return as a transfer fee. I don't know if it's worth Inter Miami investing however much they're asking for the player in January versus getting him for free in July, but that's a very good question to ask as well. And we may be getting him sooner rather than later, if we're getting him.
And the reason I mention that is because the Club World Cup is in June, and so if we waited until after his contract ran out, which ends at the end of June, then he would not come to Inter Miami for the Club World Cup. Now, listen, Al Hilal is going to be in the Club World Cup. They won the Asian Champions League at some point over the last couple of years, so they'll be a participant in that tournament. They may want to keep him just for that tournament specifically, or at least not have him come to a club that they may have to face in that tournament. But just something to keep in mind. I think if it doesn't happen in January, and I don't think it's likely to happen in January, I think he's not going to be available for the Club World Cup, which is, a big selling point. Okay, let's flip over to Facundo Farias, who is likely to start next year at that left wing spot. Rumors over the last 24 hours, and not even rumors, pictures confirmed that he is back in training, fully healthy for the first time since he tore the ACL back in January in that friendly in El Salvador. Really tough to have that happen like 11 minutes into his first preseason game. But it's what you get when you go to El Salvador and you play on their fields against the national team. He's back. Let's talk about Facundo Farias.
Yeah, I almost forgot his specter as part of the Inter Miami roster this year. It's so good to see him, man. He's a very dynamic player. I love watching him play. Something that we've been missing on the wings when Messi's not there. I know Diego Gomez has been doing a really good job of playing that left wing spot, but I wonder in another world, Facu Farias would be completely healthy, playing that left wing spot, and we'd have Gomez in the middle, and that would just be so good to watch. But regardless, I'm really excited because he has a very high potential. I'm completely convinced that if he has a good preseason with us next year, he's going to definitely nail down that left wing spot with Gomez leaving, and it's going to be fun to watch him play. I'm just glad that he's back. He looks very happy in training. He's back in full training. So it's a good motivation for him to be around players who are preparing for the playoffs and just be around the team. And I'm excited for him to be back next season, man. Unfortunate that he can't be playing in the playoffs due to, roster rules and stuff. But it's going to be very good to have him back.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Inter Miami put him on the season-ending injury list, which means he's not going to be eligible for the playoffs, but he should be ready to go for January. And honestly, it's a good way. It's a good thing. Let him get a couple extra months of just full recovery, fully get his body back, and make sure there's nothing that is a setback or causes this to happen again. It is his second ACL, so as we deal with something similar with Ian Frey, that's something to consider. But hopefully he's ready to go. He's spent the entire year rehabbing and trying to reconstruct that knee in a healthy way. So it'll be good to have him back. For those that don't know, we bought him last summer, a year and a half ago, at the same time we bought Toto Aviles, the same time we bought Diego Gomez. And truthfully, he was the best player and most now ready player when he came. He was able to contribute offensively. He was able to be an impact player. He had a huge goal against LAFC that I thought really turned the tide of that game in 2023. So he, I think, was expecting to have a huge season this year. I think Tata Martino wanted him and expected him to be the starting left winger for this club in 2024. And of course, the injury set him back. But this is a player that has a really high level floor as long as he can come back to being what he was when he left. And the ceiling is also really admirable and exciting. And so if he can take a similar step to what Diego Gomez did between 2023 and 2024, we have a really good player. And maybe we'll decide we don't need to add a guy like Neymar because Facundo Farias is that good. Now, for those that never saw him play, he can play on both sides, left and right. He's a really good player. He profiles in a way that could also play as a 10. So doesn't have explosive pace, doesn't have, Messi Neymar level dribbling ability, but he's really high level in all of those aspects, at least by MLS standards. So really good player, can score, can assist, can get up and down the field. Exciting to have him back. And I'm happy to have him back, man. And I like the fact that he's going to get an extra 3 months before he's actually forced to go full throttle in the preseason. So happy he's back in training, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got next year.
Yeah, it's good to be around the team at a time when they're preparing for the playoffs. And I say that because he's going to be able to engage in the heavy workouts, the training as well, but not overwork himself to the point that he aggravates something. So it's going to be good for him to be around the team. But I'm glad he has the 3 months layoff just to make sure everything's in good place. He's feeling good. His body's fully fit before he gets back into the starting 11 fold.
Can I ask you a question, though? Because MLS now has these new rules as of this past summer, where you can either have 2 DPs and 4 U22s or 3 DPs and 3 U22s. As of this moment, Inter Miami has 4 U22s, but we do know Diego Gomez is likely on his way out. That would take Inter Miami down to 3: Redondo, Aviles, and Facundo Farias. And actually, Benjamin Kramaski, I think, is on the border, but I don't think he has to count as U22 if they don't want him to. Does part of you want them to keep that last spot open for a true DP level player, even if they have to hold it to the summer? Would you like to see them get another U22 in and potentially just plan on selling Redondo next summer, or Facundo Farias, or maybe Toto Aviles next summer? Or do you think, do you think they should just hold that spot in case there's a Neymar ready, or, Luka Modric, or whoever it is, right?
Yeah, I think I would like us to hold that spot because there's enough talent in this team right now. But of course, we would be, again, we're selfish as fans, right? We want the best players to play for Inter Miami. So I do think there's a genuine possibility, if not Neymar, maybe Di Maria. You mentioned Luka Modric, maybe not, but there is definitely a possibility and a willingness for Inter Miami to have one of these next superstars come into the team. So for me, I would definitely keep that spot open just in case an opportunity arises. And then we can see in the summer. If not, we can fill that up. But for sure, I would like to keep that DP spot open just in case.
I will remind you, a lot of these big name stars come to the league and they do not hit it off in the same way that Inter Miami has had success with in the Messi era. I mean, even Blaise Matuidi, and even Inter Miami has an experience that's not so great with these type of players. And, Olivier Giroud is struggling to adapt immediately to a really good LAFC team. So
I almost forgot that he played for LAFC, honestly, before you mentioned it.
Yeah. And part of that's because it hasn't been that impressive of a, debut. He's got some goals, but I think just the chemistry and the way he fits into that team is not ideal. And then, other big names across the league, Toronto, 2 superstars that haven't been able to adjust and dominate. So just because Inter Miami's had a ton of success doesn't mean it's automatically the right strategy for every player, every team. And I do want to keep that in mind. I think teams are having more success with these U22 type players. But
It's simple,
anyways,
man. Sorry, before we move on, it's simple. You just have to buy players with a Barcelona ID and you'll be fine. Every single Barcelona player who's played for the MLS has been successful, whether it's Ibrahimovic, whether it's Sergio Busquets, whether it's Lionel Messi or Luis Suarez or Jordi Alba. So get in a Barcelona ID player and you know who
Ricky
I'm talking
Puig.
about, and we could be fine. Ricky Puig as well. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think we just, you go to Messi and say, who is still good at this? And we'll just go get that guy.
Yeah.
Speaking of LAFC and Olivier Giroud, they did win their first game of their playoffs, 2-1 over Vancouver. That was on Sunday night. But I thought we could take a minute to recap what's happened around the league in the first round of the playoffs, because I think it's been a lot of chalk, but also one very exciting upset that I think we should talk about. But of course, Inter Miami placed first in that first leg. They beat Atlanta 2-1 the following night. The LA Galaxy dominated Colorado. We mentioned that a little bit in our post-game show, but Orlando City beat Charlotte in that first game. Maybe we should stop there for a second, because this is the next round opponent for us, assuming we can beat Atlanta in one of these next two games. Orlando City, Charlotte. Orlando City gets the home win, 2-0, but that series is going back to Charlotte, and I do expect Charlotte to is going to be ready to win that game. Their defense is stout, and I think they have what they need going forward to knock that off. I think that series is going to 3 games, but anything from that first game that told you that we should be worried or nervous, or are you just ready to go for whoever
No,
it is?
Orlando still looks good, man. I'm just waiting for them to drop off, and they just don't seem to, which is a little bit scary because I fully expect them to be our next opponents if we can beat and when we beat Atlanta. But you're right, Charlotte does have the tools to be able to beat them. I actually thought it was closer than it would than people make it out to be between Orlando and Charlotte. I expected Orlando to do the job at home. I expect Charlotte to come up with the goods when they go back at their home, and then this series should go to a 3-game, to the third game for the decider. So we'll see how the second game plays out, because I want to see how Charlotte adapts at home against Orlando, because I do think there's definitely a case to be made for them to win.
Do you think that it helps Inter Miami if they win in 2 games and that series goes to 3? And you know what? Hold that thought, because we're going to come back to that in a few minutes. Cincinnati had a very close game against NYCFC. They do pull it out. But the real upset that we should talk about is the New York Red Bulls beating the Columbus Crew last night, 1-0 in Columbus, which means that the big bad Columbus Crew, who have talked a big game all year and have gone to all these finals and won trophies, and Wilfred Nancy and his 3-4-2-1 and all of that, are on the brink of elimination, going back to Harrison, New Jersey at Red Bull Arena next week. And if they don't win there, their season's over.
I'm not going to get that giddy that quickly. I think this is a team that's experienced enough to know exactly what position they're in and what they need to do to get out of it. It's not an ideal start for them. They did lose 1-0 to New York Red Bulls, who I thought they would absolutely dispatch. But the New York Red Bulls showed that they're confident, they're aggressive, and they know how to get a result against a good team, which was interesting to see their game plan. They started off hot and heavy. Then they moved on to a counter-attacking style, and then towards the 80th minute, they would completely park the bus, which was interesting. But I expect Columbus to bounce back from this. This is going to go to a 3-game as well, according to me. But if New York can pull a job at their home ground, which should be the case, right? Technically, they have the advantage at home. This is going to be a disaster start for Columbus, or disaster class from Columbus, because all their talk about how good their team is and how they deserve to go to the Club World Cup, it kind of all falls apart. So I am expecting them to come out firing against New York, but if they're not able to do it, that's a big win for a lot of teams like Cincinnati and Inter Miami, because
the Columbus Crew, very good team. A couple of things. One, the Red Bulls actually could have won that game by more.
Yeah.
Columbus had a couple good chances, but so did the Red Bulls. That game could have gone. It could have easily been a 3-2 game. It finishes 1-0. But that just tells me that there's something to this New York Red Bull team. If they can get it right at home, they can pull this upset. And it's a Red Bull team that had been struggling down the stretch. The second half of the season, they were not very impressive. And a team that was looking like maybe we can host a first round playoff game finishes as the 7th seed. They weren't happy about that. And they came out and proved that they were a better team than I think most people thought. Like you, I don't think a lot of people gave them a chance in this series. But again, it just goes to show this is the playoffs. Every game matters. Every shot matters. Every team is capable on their night. And so for Inter Miami, take that and remember, Atlanta can beat you at home. And then take you to game 3 where anything can happen. Just go out there, play calm, composed, and compact, and you're going to be fine. But no lapse in concentration, or you could be in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, and another thing that this shows me is that Columbus is beatable. On their night, Columbus is beatable. Yeah, we know that.
Inter Miami knows that well.
We now know that even more, right? Even in the playoffs, even at home, they're beatable. So we're going to see them, if we ever see them in the playoffs. It's going to be at our home, at Chase Stadium. So yeah, it just should inject us with a bit of confidence, but also a little bit of concern, or not concern, but caution that
it's a reminder.
Team can be beaten, man. Exactly. And you're not invincible. You have to be good on the night every single time that you play. And that's how it should be in the playoffs, man. Every team has a chance.
So speaking of things to be concerned about, speaking of things to stay focused on, we're going to spend the second half of this episode talking about 6 things that could stand in the way of Inter Miami going all the way to the MLS Cup and winning it all. And so we thought we could spend a few minutes talking on each of these subjects. We put together a list of 6 things. And how can we mitigate these? What can Inter Miami do? Is it just about starting hot, starting fresh, or does it have to be a team effort? Let's go with number 1. And we went with team selection. It's not the only Tata Martino question, but it is something we've talked about a lot during the regular season, getting the midfield balance right, making sure you're not exposing yourself going the other way, making sure you still have enough offensive firepower, playmaking, ability to progress the ball. There is a way to balance this team really effectively and play the way you want to play, but it does take the right combination of personnel. Talk to me about your concerns about team selection.
Yeah, I think we've constantly asked Tata Martino to pick a certain 11, and he's not entirely done that, at least to our liking. And I don't think I've ever been 100% convinced with a starting 11 up until the last game against Atlanta, where I thought the team selection was exactly on point. Yes, there was a case to be made for Gomez to play centrally, perhaps, or Robert Taylor to be on the left wing side. But that's just an adjustment to an already very good starting 11. And I think it was the first time, whether it was due to Tata Martino's team selection, whether it was due to injury concerns or some other issues, such as availability due to yellow cards. Last time was the first time that we actually saw a starting 11 where I looked at the team sheet and I was like, this is potentially our best starting 11. So it's important. I'm not saying we need to pick the same starting 11 every time, but we need to obviously tailor it to the opposition, but the team selection needs to be completely correct. We're in the playoffs. We can't afford to have a porous midfield. You need to have a midfield that is more defensively stout. As we saw last time around, Yannick Bright and Redondo were picked in that midfield to be more defensively solid than offensively capable, and that's what I liked about it. Sergio Busquets had the license to be central if needed and put the bodies in the middle, or push back into the back line and dictate play from back there, which was exactly how I would have planned it out as well. Push your fullbacks up. Yes, that was formation that was working against Atlanta, but you need to make sure that when you're playing a different team, for instance, when you're playing Columbus, the team selection is there, the starting 11 is there, you're defensively stout, and your midfield is completely locked in. The front 3 pick themselves, so I'm not even going to talk about it too much, but you need to have your starting 11 on point every single time.
I think it's the midfield most crucially, because like you said, and like we've talked about, a single goal can change your season at this point in the season. And so being sound defensively is, I think, the key. And it's something that Tata Martino hasn't shown a propensity to prioritize over his tenure at Inter Miami. And from what I can gather from our Barcelona friends, a long time since he's really done that. But he did that on Friday night against Atlanta. He goes with the 3 defensive-minded midfielders in Busquets, Redondo, and Bright. And by doing that, he keeps Atlanta in check in transition. He keeps Atlanta in check, doing everything they wanted to do going forward. And so, yes, they get a goal, but it was really their one high-quality chance of the game. Inter Miami can deal with 1, maybe 2 high-quality chances for the opposition because Messi, Suarez allows you to put 2, 3, 4 goals on the board without playing out of your mind. And so to me, it's just make sure you're solid in the middle and everything flows from there. You have the talent and up front to get the job done going forward. And then defensively, I know we don't have superstars in the back line other than Jordi Alba, but if you protect them with the midfield, you're in a really healthy spot. And so to me, it's just about getting the midfield right. There are a lot of midfield options that he can go with even to this point. Matthias Rojas, Julian Gressel. And I'm not sure that if you start messing with it, you're going to still get a formula that works for you. And so prioritize defense, and I think you're going to be in a good spot.
Yeah, and speaking of team selection, I'm going to bet you now that the team that we see against Atlanta next game might be different than the one we saw in that first game. I just think Tata Martino has, as you mentioned, that tendency to change things around. Julian Gressel is potentially going to get a chance in that midfield, and he is going to make a few changes here and there. I don't know if that's the right way to go about it. You want consistency, you want chemistry, you want a solid, stable play style, and you want the players to understand each other on the pitch. So I think we need to go with at least the base foundational starting 11 needs to be right, and it starts with the midfield. So I have a question mark over whether the team selection is going to be correct at all points in time during the playoff.
See, for me, I actually disagree. I think as long as everyone stays healthy, it's going to be this 11 moving forward. If you have a center back problem and you have to move Busquets back there, like you open up conversations that could be a problem. But for me, as long as you start with Busquets, Bright, and Redondo even in the midfield, I think you're in a really healthy spot. And I think that's where Tata's going to go. Yes, he has loyalty to Julian Gressel, but I think that's where he wants to go because he wants to win this tournament really, really badly.
You have more faith.
I think maybe it's naive. Second thing, and I asked you a couple minutes ago, do you think it helps or hurts Inter Miami if they win in 2 games and that Charlotte Orlando City game goes to 3 games? Because after that potential 3rd game, you have the international break before the next round, which means that Inter Miami would have a 2.5 week break between clinching in game 2 and their following round game, whereas whoever they play would have a much shorter period between games. They would have a 2-week break. We would have a 3-week break. And you go into that game, it's a do or die one game final, really. I'm a little worried that this team is going to clinch on Saturday, go on international break, think they're doing great. And, people are going to stay here, but they're going to lose focus, and that intensity might not be there for that second round game that following week after the international break against an Orlando City, who will be licking their chops to get a chance to redeem themselves for what happened early in the season, but also to knock off the Supporter Shield winners in the playoffs and to prove how good they are. I'm a little worried about the focus of this team if they have to take 3 weeks off and the form continuing throughout. Are you concerned about that at all, or is that just something that's in my head?
No, I think that's a legit worry. That you're absolutely right to think that way. I'll answer your first question. Would I prefer Inter Miami to go to that 3rd game? No. End it now. 2 games. You have to finish it off.
Sorry, it's not. Of course, we want to win in Atlanta. I just mean, is it an advantage if
I don't
if the
think
other
so.
team goes to 3, or would you rather them be the same? Like, would you rather see Orlando City also win in 2?
Of course, I would rather see Orlando City also win it in 2, and then each team has equal time off. But for Inter Miami, I want them to finish the series off in 2 games. I don't want it to go to that potential 3rd game where Atlanta might even have a peep of a chance at progressing through at the cost of Inter Miami. That being said, I agree with you. There is a case to be made about the lack of focus. Inter Miami players sometimes tend to have a little bit of a lack of focus at the start of the games. For instance, we're not sharp enough, and we take our own sweet time building up into the game, and it always comes down to us catching up to the opposition sometimes. I think against Atlanta was the first time in a very, very long time, and potentially ever this season, that I saw 11 Inter Miami players absolutely locked in from start to finish. Every single one of them looked like they knew what they were doing. They were focused and they were completely locked in, as I said. That I think is the playoff mentality. And if I put myself in their shoes, and of course, that's probably never going to happen, but if I put myself in their shoes and I'm thinking to myself, listen, this is the playoffs. We're playing against our rivals, Orlando, let's say, in the next round. Yes, we've had a couple of weeks off. Some of the players will go away on international duty, which might be good to keep them healthy, which might be good to keep them in game rhythm. The other players who are not going for international duty and who are still here need to make sure that they're completely locked in and they still have that playoff mentality, because you don't want to let it slip. Everything you just mentioned, playing against your rivals, Orlando, everyone notices Orlando is in very good hot form. Everyone knows. Tata Martino knows. Lionel Messi knows. The rest of the team knows. They are our rivals. We beat them 5-0. They're playing at our home. We don't want them coming here and putting on a show. No, absolutely no way. So this will be on their mind. And I'm hoping that being in the playoffs and having that playoff mentality switched on is exactly what keeps this team going through a period of playing no games over 2 weeks. And that should be enough to make sure that we're locked in, because winning is a mentality, man. You can't just switch it on and off when you need to. You have to have it on at all times. So I'm hoping that's the case with this team.
Yeah, I will say they have a mixed record in terms of how they do coming off of international duty this season. The first one in March, they lost 4-0 to the Red Bulls during the international break, but then they had a 1-1 draw at home against NYCFC. In June, they came back after the June international break and played Philadelphia, but that was the game where they went down to 9 men. They only beat Philadelphia in stoppage time with sort of a miracle last-minute shot. And then they beat Philadelphia, and then it improved in the second half. They beat Philadelphia 3-1. That was Messi's return game after the September window. And then most recently, after the October window, they beat New England Revolution 6-2. But even that game, it was they went down 2-0, right? And then they had to make a comeback and won that game comfortably in the end, but it was a sluggish start. So I'm just a little nervous about this. I think it's something to keep in mind. And I think as long as the players are aware, they'll be fine. But this is the type of thing that can sneak up on you. Okay, next, let's talk about set-piece defense, because it was a huge concern for Inter Miami last year. They went out and got Nico Freire just to address that. I think they haven't done a lot else to address it in terms of personnel. I don't think David Martinez is like an elite player in the box. Actually, Yannick Bright might be the best player in terms of aerial duels won for Inter Miami in terms of additions from last year. But we haven't really seen this team be tested too significantly since David Martinez came in, since we've had this sort of 11 playing consistently. And I think that's because we haven't played a lot of teams that have tried to do that. Even Atlanta, we saw they lost Stein Gregerson. They didn't get any set pieces in our half, in our own half of the field, but they lost their biggest set piece weapon in Gregerson. New England doesn't really have that. So something that has sort of been on my mind. They have improved on set piece defenses, but I wonder how secure that is as we head into the playoffs against some of the best teams.
I'm actually not as concerned, and maybe that's to do with the fact that we haven't been tested, as you mentioned, but I do think there's a sort of a correlation between not seeing that many opportunities on set pieces against us versus us actually being able to deal with a lot of them, so it doesn't come across as though we're facing too many opportunities. And there's definitely some sort of correlation there. But I will say Drake Allender has improved immensely in terms of his command of the box when he comes out for the balls in the air. He's been very quick to come off his line whenever he needs to. That's really helped in defending some of those set pieces. But again, it's one of those things, right? In the playoffs, you don't want to give away a cheap corner. You don't want to give away an easy free kick opportunity. Don't commit silly fouls in and around the box, because that could just lead to an easy goal opportunity for the opposition, and some of the better teams are definitely going to punish you. I imagine Charlotte would be licking their wounds against licking their lips against us if they get an opportunity close to the box or for corners, because they've got big men in there like Adjumang to be
Yeah.
able to deal with some of the
Yeah.
corners.
Swiderski
So
too.
yeah, so they've got options in there, and when you face teams like that, you want to be on top of your game. Connects that to being completely concentrated and locked in. But I think we've been better, large part because of Drake Calendar. Haven't seen David Martinez being tested in the air too much, but maybe he's good at organizing the defense. But we've looked better over the course of the season. So I think this is one that we should be okay with. And if we concede one off from the corners or from free kicks, then I don't know if it'll be down to us being poor on set pieces or it'll just be one of those opportunities. But I think we'll be okay.
And I don't want to denigrate David Martinez. I think he's been fine. I think he's been actually quite good in terms of set pieces on offense. So I'm sure he's fine defensively. It's just I don't feel like he's been tested. I think the other thing that we haven't mentioned is Inter Miami has done a good job of late of not giving up set piece opportunities to teams that are really good at set pieces. You mentioned Charlotte. We had that 1-1 draw, but we did a really good job of not fouling them in situations where they could put together set pieces. And that's just as important for set piece defense as actually defending the set pieces, is not putting yourself in a bad situation, not giving up a ton of corners, etc. And listen, some of the best teams that we're going to face, like the Columbus Crew, they're not really a team that is going to rely on set piece opportunities. So I don't think LA Galaxy are either, but we'll see. But it's just something that's been on my mind. Okay, let's move forward to the three that I think are the biggest and most substantive. And let's start with opposition goalkeeping, because we saw in that first game, Brad Guzan had the game of his life. We've seen it a couple of times this year where an incredible game from a goalkeeper can really frustrate Inter Miami. And even though we have sort of a little bit of cushion now with Atlanta, when we move forward, it's going to be do or die every game. That concerns me. Christian Kalina, incredible season this year for Charlotte if we see him. Gillespie is a strong veteran for Orlando City. There are some really good goalkeepers potentially on our path to the championship. And if they have one of those games, I would be a little concerned about Messi and Suarez getting a little too frustrated and not putting the ball in the back of the net, and that potentially costing us.
Yeah, I think the positive silver lining from the Atlanta game was that despite the fact that Brad Guzan had the best game of his life potentially for Atlanta on Friday, we were still able to win the game. We created way too many opportunities for him to be able to keep us down as much as he tried. But on the flip side, we've seen it before against, I think, Montreal, against New York City. When Luis Suarez doesn't get
Matt
on the
Freese,
score sheet, and when he can actually try and when he tries too hard or when he gets denied by the keeper, he gets very frustrated. That starts seeping into his gameplay as well, and he becomes a little bit of a sulky boy on that field. We saw Lionel Messi was very frustrated after the end of the game, despite the fact that we won. So it's definitely something on the mind when the other goalkeeper has an absolute worldie of a game. It frustrates you. It really, gets in your under your skin. So need to be mindful of that. But I'll be honest, I don't think another goalkeeper has a performance like Brad Guzan did against Inter Miami as he did last week.
Yeah, and the reason I put this down and I thought we should talk about it is not, you can't control if the other team has a player that goes off, but you can control your reaction to it. And I think the composure to continue putting chances, and this goes both to the players and to the coaching staff. Inter Miami didn't go for the kill last game against Atlanta, and part of that was because Brad Guzan continued to stave off and frustrate them. And so in the final 10 minutes, they were a little bit more sit back and maybe we hit on the counter, but let's just prevent this last goal. You have to be sort of composed, keep your composure, and just keep putting on quality chances. And to me, that's the biggest thing.
And I think the reason that we won against Atlanta, because we did that for large parts of the game. We continued to create chances. We continued to do the stuff that we do rather than try extra hard. Like we weren't taking too many shots from outside the box. We weren't doing too many things that were, that one step extra. which was good to see. But then towards the end, it became a little bit frustrating because you had a couple of opportunities that felt like, okay, these are easy opportunities, and then we complicated them by our own measure. So completely get your point, and hopefully um, we learn from this and move on from this, right?
Yeah. Okay. And then the big two, that one's sort of a distant third, but the big two, transition defense. We've talked about the starting 11. We've talked about the midfield, but still, this is the biggest threat. And listen, any team that's going to be a ball dominant team that is 60 to 70% possession is going to be susceptible to transition opportunities. But this is the bugaboo for Inter Miami's defense. This is the thing that has held them back from being an elite defense really this year, is that they continuously give up opportunities in transition. We saw David Martinez take a step forward last game in comparison to his first game back from injury, but Toto Avila, solid one-on-one defender. But to me, it always starts in the midfield. And so going back to team selection, getting the starting 11 right, that midfield has to play a huge part in preventing transition defenses or transition opportunities, both by being good in possession, not turning the ball over carelessly, but also making sure you track the runners, making sure your defense doesn't get overwhelmed by numbers, because those fullbacks are going high. Chelo Wigan's going high. Jordi Alba's going to go real high. And so that midfield has to do a really good job. And that mostly comes down to Yannick Bright, Federico Redondo.
Yeah, the defense, I think, with Aviles and David Martinez have done a good job of sweeping up whenever there's space left in behind Jordi Alba or Chelo Wigan. You spoke about this in the post-game show after Atlanta game, where you mentioned that there seems to be a very good understanding of when players need to cover for other players whenever someone leaves a space in behind. So that understanding has definitely improved. But I completely agree with you. It starts with the defense. The center of the pitch is exactly where we struggle to contain opposition attacks from. That's where they penetrate us, and that's where they hurt us the most. Against Atlanta, it was very promising because we didn't have too many opportunities that I can outright say were defensive transitions. The goal that they scored was not really a transition. It was, our defense was very well set, and then Pedro Amador was able to find a really good ball into Lobjanitse, and that's how they scored. So we didn't see that in the Atlanta game, and I was very happy with that.
They did have one or two opportunities. But
Jamal
Tiare right before half had an opportunity that he put wide. But you're right. David Martinez had a nice one-on-one moment. Toto Aviles has been quite good in terms of one-on-one defense. So you're right. Inter Miami did a solid job.
Yeah, but it started from the midfield, though. That's the point I was going to get at. It started from the midfield. The fact that Redondo and Yannick Bright were more central, compact, and were clogging up the midfield a lot, and Sergio Busquets was going in and out, supporting them as and when needed, really closed out the space. And the problem happens is when every single one of our midfielder is doing the same thing and pushing forward. That's when we get hurt the most. And a lot of the times this season, we've seen that when Yannick Bright is pushing up, Redondo is pushing up. Yannick Bright has the tendency to come up and sweep up when needed or be that defensive cover. But more so than team selection, it's also the instructions given to the midfielders by the coaching staff about their roles in the team. For instance, Redondo sometimes has been asked to play in a position that doesn't necessarily suit him, whereas in the Atlanta game, he was playing a very good role, solid, simple, defensive, minded at least. And that helps us. That helps the defensive transition. So we have a solution to it. We just need to apply it properly whenever the chance arises.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last thing, and I think this is the biggest, I think we both agree this is the biggest, is Tata Martino's in-game substitution decisions. This is, I think, the biggest red flag with Tata Martino as a coach. I think that he does a lot of really good and impressive and important things, but there have been times this year in the biggest games where even though he gets the starting 11 right, though he gets the tactical setup right, the substitutions that come in the second half either are too late or they're the wrong subs, and they do not impact the game in the way that we might need as we move in and play some of the best teams in the league.
I think it's more the latter, and this point is a lot more concerning than the fact that Tata Martino's team selection and tactical setup can be questioned. I think he's got it more often than not right when it comes to the tactics, when it comes to team selection. It's always the in-game management. That Monterrey game still absolutely blows my mind. That Columbus game in the Leagues Cup absolutely blows my mind. He had a couple of games recently as well where we were just absolutely dumbfounded as to why he didn't make the substitutions when he needed to or when he should have. And that's a thing that I don't think we are going to get away from this season. At least it just seems to be a Tata Martino thing where unless there's an absolute necessity in terms of an injury or something, he's not going to make the substitutions at the right time. He's not going to make the substitutions when the game state asks for it. I don't know whether he's too stubborn to do that, whether he is concerned that he's going to upset the team state. Don't know what it is, but it just really affects us, especially in the latter half of the games when you can see that players are struggling, need to be brought on, need fresh ideas to make sure that we adapt to the changes that the opposition is making. Case in point being that Columbus game in Leagues Cup where Wilfred Nancy made 3 changes at halftime and Tata Martino had no response to it. So you have to respond, you have to adapt because the opposition is going to adapt to what you're doing. And it's a game of 90 minutes, man. You have to play throughout the 90 minutes.
Well, and listen, Tata Martino's not a young coach. He's not learning and growing anymore. So you're right. This is what Tata is. And I think the worst and most concerning part is the 2 games you mentioned, and it's happened in the regular season, but it's season defining when it happens.
Yeah.
It's season defining when it happens in those games. The trip to Monterrey was unbelievably bad. And I think he did a lot wrong that day, but the Columbus game, he set the team up right, the right 11. He just didn't make the subs early enough to impact the game and stop the flow of momentum going to Columbus, which ultimately cost us the game. And listen, that Monterrey game cost us the CONCACAF Champions Cup. That Leagues Cup game cost us the Leagues Cup, right? We have a very good chance to go on and win both of those tournaments if we survive those games. And I know the Monterrey game required an overturning of the home result, but if you can get that win there, you have a great chance to go win both of those tournaments. And all of a sudden, we're not talking about this as the best MLS season ever. We're talking about one of the best CONCACAF seasons ever. And this is potentially the best team that's ever played in CONCACAF. That's not where we're at right now. And I think it's because in the most crucial moments, Tata Martino failed to deliver the changes that Inter Miami needed. And I am not convinced that he's going to do that over the next four games, right? 4 wins to a title. And hopefully we just get out to a bunch of early leads, but I'm concerned if we don't.
And I'll end by saying this, that it's not that he doesn't have players at his disposal. The bench that we saw against Atlanta was probably the strongest bench that any MLS team can field. We've got players, we've got capabilities, we've got qualities on the bench. Use them, Tata. Just use them.
Yeah, we went over in the pregame show, but I think Inter Miami had 6 players on the bench that would have started for Atlanta on Friday night. So you're right. There's definitely talent. Okay, before we wrap it up, let's just do a quick minute or two talking about this Atlanta game. It's game 2. Inter Miami has the chance to clinch it. If they lose, they still get a home game to try and win and close it out the following weekend. But let's just go to Atlanta, put this one away. Do you think we're going to get the same starting 11? I know you mentioned you might see Julian Gressel in there. Or do you think Tata felt really good about the game plan and how it performed? And that he'll just continue with what he did last time?
I think Tata Martino, because this may be the only chance to bring in some of the other players off the bench to the starting 11. So he may use this as an opportunity to tinker a little bit. I think Matthias Rojas might get some game time from the start. I think Julian Gressel might be central as well. But overall, the game plan is going to be quite similar. I think it should be similar because it worked really, really well against Atlanta in the first game. And I don't think there's going to be too much tinkering, but maybe a couple of personnel changes here and there. Overall, more of the same, right? The same level of concentration. The tactics were really good. I think the game tactics will work, even if Atlanta comes back with something new. I expect Atlanta to sit back and counter as much as possible to try and get something out of the game and prevent Inter Miami from sweeping them. But for me, the tactics that we had in the first game worked really well to be able to use them again. And of course, adapt as and when you need it during the game. But other than that, we should be good to go.
Yeah, there's no update on Stein Gregerson or Brooks Lennon, the 2 defensive players that left the game early. I still am not sure what happened with Gregerson, but Brooks Lennon had a shoulder dislocation. I imagine he's going to be good to go for this game. And if that's the case, I expect them to go with that 4-2-3-1 that they have played a lot, 4-4-1-1 type format. And so if that's the case, I think you could just go right back to what you did. Those 2 being healthy will impact what formation and how Atlanta sets up, but I think you should expect them to both be healthy. We'll obviously get updates as we get closer to game time, but for now, I think you just prepare the same way. I think you go with the same 11 because it was so effective in that first game, and I think we can close this out if we have a good performance, especially in the first couple minutes. If you get another early goal, I think it could kill the momentum and energy that crowd's going to bring. So I think they close out this weekend. Guys, we'll be back for our pregame show 1 hour before kickoff. You guys know the deal. And other than that, enjoy your day, enjoy your evening, and we will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Do us a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. Since our first viewer, sharing this with you all has been the very best part. So from the beginning until the end, thank you for being a part of this and have a wonderful day.